March 23, 1943. Luftwaffe Forward Base, Eastern Ukraine. Oberst Franz Müller paced the briefing room, his face tight with frustration. Maps of Soviet supply routes lay scattered across the oak table, illuminated by the harsh glow of overhead lights. Cigarette smoke hung like morning fog as 20 officers sat in uncomfortable silence. The previous night had marked the fourth consecutive week of mysterious explosions along German supply lines. Ammunition depots, fuel reserves, and railway junctions had all been hit with alarming precision. No one had slept properly in days, and High Command was demanding explanation. "Gentlemen, I've gathered intelligence on our mysterious nighttime visitors," Müller announced, his voice dripping with disdain. "Apparently, we're being harassed by schoolgirls." Laughter rippled through the room. Soviet females flying crop dusters, wooden biplanes from 1928 no less. He gestured to aerial photographs. "These women don't even have radios or parachutes. Open cockpits in -30 temperatures." Hauptmann Werner Koch raised his glass in mock toast to Stalin's desperation, sending little girls in toy planes. The officers roared with laughter. "We'll swat these night witches from our skies by month's end," Müller concluded confidently. "These primitive annoyances cannot seriously threaten the Luftwaffe." What Oberst Müller didn't know was that Nadezhda Popova, already responsible for over 400 of what would eventually be 852 bombing missions, was at that moment airborne, just 30 kilometers from his position. At 21 years old, the Ukrainian-born pilot was preparing for what would become her record night of 18 consecutive missions before dawn. Having already survived 3 crash landings and an aircraft riddled with 42 bullet holes, Popova was methodically working through a list of targets that included Müller's own fuel depot. Within 6 hours, the confident Oberst would be frantically organizing fire crews as 500-kilogram bombs rained down precisely where the night witches weren't supposed to be capable of reaching. By sunrise, Müller would begin understanding what so many Germans were discovering. They had catastrophically underestimated these women. German night air defense doctrine, perfected since 1939, had evolved through painful lessons. During the Battle of Britain, Luftwaffe night fighters suffered 23% crew loss from weather and navigation errors alone, forcing integration of radio directions. After losing 11 pilots to hypothermia in winter 1940, enclosed cockpits became mandatory for all-night operation. Operation Barbarossa's early phase revealed that without proper communication, night fighters collided with alarming frequency, leading to strict radio discipline protocol. Each requirement emerged from blood-purchased experience. Armored cockpits. After 30% of downed pilots were killed by random rifle fire. Self-sealing fuel tanks following the discovery that 40% of night fighter losses came from minor fuel line rupture. Emergency parachutes after realizing that slow-speed bailouts below 2,000 meters were survivable. Most critically, minimum engagement speed was established at 180 mph after slower aircraft proved fatally vulnerable to defensive fire. The Junkers Ju-88 night fighter perfectly embodied these lessons. 300 mph top speed, crew of 4, Fuji 220 radar, 2,400 horsepower twin engine, and an impressive tally of 357 British bombers destroyed between 1940 and 1942. German confidence wasn't mere arrogance, it was earned through technological superiority. While German engineers perfected these requirements, Nadezhda Popova was proving them irrelevant on her 437th mission. On February 8, 1943, she approached a German ammunition train near Krasnodar with her navigator Yekaterina Ryabova. Flying at just 400 meters, Popova violated every German operational principle. No radio communication, using only hand signals between aircraft. No parachute, as their low-altitude tactics made them pointless. And a maximum speed of 94 mph in a wooden aircraft that predated the war. German gunners opened fire too late as Popova's Po-2 dropped 6 bombs directly onto the train's central cars. The resulting explosion was visible 50 kilometers away, destroying 230 tons of artillery shells and killing 28 German personnel. German command initially dismissed the successful attack as lucky, one fortunate strike among what would eventually be Popova's 852 mission. They couldn't comprehend that her squadron's success was not despite their primitive aircraft, but because of them. The Soviet response violated every principle German doctrine established as necessary for night bombing operations. The Polikarpov PO-2 biplane was essentially flying kindling, constructed of wood frame with canvas stretched over it, offering no protection from bullets, shrapnel, or the merciless Russian winter. Its open cockpit subjected pilots to temperatures reaching -40 degrees, causing severe frostbite on exposed facial skin. Breath froze on eyelashes, forming ice crystals that had to be periodically broken away to maintain vision. The aircraft lacked all equipment German doctrine deemed essential. No radios meant communication limited to hand signals, flares, or flashlight. No parachutes, because low-altitude operations made them useless weight. No armor, because the aircraft couldn't carry the extra bulk and remain airborne. The specification disparity was almost comical. PO-2's maximum speed of 94 mph versus the Ju-88's 300 mph. A single M11 engine producing 100 horsepower compared to the German fighter's 2,400 horsepower. Airframes designed in 1928, making them older than the pilots flying them. Production cost of approximately $5,000 versus the Ju-88's $80,000. And assembly time of 3 weeks versus 3 months. The Night Witches weren't merely women flying combat missions. They were women flying wooden training aircraft converted to bombers, dropping explosives by hand, without instruments, in the dark, behind enemy lines. What German engineers saw as fatal weaknesses, Nadezhda Popova transformed into advantages during her record-setting night of 18 consecutive missions over Taganrog in April to 1943. The PO-2's simplicity meant ground crews could refuel it in 4 minutes and reload bombs in 3 minutes, enabling rapid turnaround times impossible for German bombers. After her 9th sortie that night, ground fire caught her right wing, punching 17 bullet holes through the canvas. The maintenance officer wanted to ground the aircraft, but Popova refused. Canvas tears didn't affect aerodynamics like metal damage would. If I'd been flying one of their metal coffins, she later explained, that bullet would have ricocheted until it found me or something critical. Their aircraft are designed to fight their kind of war. We designed tactics to fight ours. She completed 9 more missions in that damaged aircraft before sunrise, adding to what would become her legendary 852 combat mission. While German pilots required hours of maintenance between sorties, Popova simply kept flying. An official Luftwaffe technical assessment from August 1942 concluded, Soviet deployment of female pilots in obsolete training aircraft represents a desperate measure indicating critical shortages in both qualified personnel and modern aircraft production capacity. The wooden construction and primitive equipment of these aircraft render them extremely vulnerable to all forms of defensive measure. The immutable laws of aerodynamics and combat effectiveness remain constant. Superior speed, metallic construction, and modern avionics will always defeat slower, wooden, obsolete platforms regardless of pilot motivation. We project these operations will cease within 4-6 months due to unsustainable attrition. Technical analysis reveals an overwhelming advantage in German equipment. 3.1 speed ratio, 24.1 horsepower differential, and yet, paradoxically, a Soviet cost efficiency of approximately 15.1. Assessment concludes these harassment raids produce temporary morale impact through sleep disruption, but present no serious operational threat to logistics or combat capability. Recommend monitoring, but no special countermeasures that might divert resources from countering actual threats posed by modern Soviet bomber formation. This assessment carried the full authority of Reichsluftfahrtministerium and represented the consensus of Germany's premier aeronautical engineers. It was wrong. While German High Command dismissed the threat, Nadezhda Popova was systematically dismantling their supply infrastructure near Mozdok. On August 23, 1942, the very night the assessment was being distributed to Luftwaffe commanders, Popova led a formation of 3 PO-2s against a major fuel depot, destroying 17 tanker trucks and over 10,000 liters of aviation. By this point, she had conducted over 500 missions, steadily approaching the 852 that would eventually make her one of the most decorated pilots in Soviet aviation history. German logistics officers recorded unexplainable losses that contradicted the assessment's confident predictions. Yet the Germans remained convinced that physics and engineering principles were on their side, clinging to technological superiority even as their supply lines burned. The Germans had made a fatal calculation error in their assessment of the night witches. Their logic seemed mathematically sound. Junkers Ju-88, 300 mm versus Polikarpov, PO2 at 94, created a 2x speed advantage that should have meant easy interception and destruction of the slower aircraft. What they critically overlooked was that successful interception requires matching speed, not merely exceeding them. This created an aerodynamic paradox around stall speed, the minimum velocity at which an aircraft generates sufficient lift to remain airborne. The Ju-88, with its heavy frame and high-performance design, stalled at approximately 120 mph, meaning it would literally fall from the sky below this speed. The PO2, with its enormous biplane wings relative to its weight, operated comfortably at 80 mph and could glide efficiently at 60 mph with its engine throttled back. This created an impossible scenario for German pilots. They must either fly past the Soviet aircraft too quickly to effectively engage, or slow down dangerously close to their own stall speed and risk catastrophic loss of control. An incident on September 14, 1942, near Stalingrad, documented this perfectly. Hauptmann Werner Schmidt, piloting a Ju-88, attempted to intercept a lone PO2. Schmidt reduced speed to 130 mph, already uncomfortably close to stall warning, while the Soviet pilot throttled back to approximately 70 mph in a shallow glide. After 3 unsuccessful passes, Schmidt reported, "Target aircraft operating below minimum engagement threshold speed. Interception physically impossible without endangering aircraft integrity." Understanding this physics made Nadezhda Popova untouchable during her 18th consecutive mission on that record-breaking night. Approaching a German headquarters building near Rostov, she detected a night fighter by its distinctive engine sound. Immediately, she throttled to minimum power and descended to just 50 meters above the ground. The German pilot made 3 passes, overshooting each time as Popova slowed her aircraft to near stalling speed. On the final attempt, the German approached his own stall speed, evidenced by the visible wobble in his wings, and was forced to abort or risk crashing. Popova completed her bombing run unhindered, adding another successful mission to her eventual 852. This tactic, repeated across hundreds of sorties, including her record 18 in one night, proved the Po-2's slowness was its greatest weapon. German engineers calculated thrust, weight, speed, firepower. They calculated everything except one variable. You cannot intercept what flies slower than your minimum speed, and Nadezhda Popova flew slower than physics allowed Germans to chase. The stall speed paradox that had already frustrated German pilots was only the first of 3 advantages the night witches possess. The entire German air defense doctrine had been built around intercepting fast bombers, primarily Soviet AL-4s and PE-2s, cruising at 250 mph or more. Their premier night fighter, the Junkers Ju-88 and Messerschmitt Bf-110, were designed as pursuit aircraft, not precision slow-speed intercept. The physics of flight created an inescapable trap. These heavy German fighters required minimum speeds of 120 mph to generate sufficient lift, while cruising comfortably at 300 mph. When approaching a target, German pilots faced a deadly calculus. Maintaining standard speed meant overshooting the slow-moving Po-2s, while decelerating to match speeds brought them dangerously close to their own stall threshold. German pilot training emphasized pursuit tactics, not the delicate art of precise slow-speed engagement. Target acquisition at high-speed differential allowed a mere 2 to 3 second firing window, insufficient when approaching at a 200+ mph differential. The very speed that made German fighters lethal against conventional bombers rendered them nearly useless against the night witches. On the night of May 14, 1943, during her 573rd mission, Nadezhda Popova demonstrated this advantage with precision. Approaching a German artillery position near Kuban, she detected the distinctive growl of a Bf-110's twin engines behind her. Without hesitation, she throttled her PO2 to minimum power, reducing speed to barely 65 mph and dropping to the treetop level. The German fighter made 4 consecutive passes, overshooting each time with increasing frustration. After each pass, the pilot had to execute a wide banking turn that took nearly a full minute, burning precious fuel while giving Popova time to adjust her course toward the target. The German's frustration became visible in his increasingly aggressive maneuvers, his wings wobbling dangerously as he attempted to slow enough for a clean shot. Meanwhile, Popova methodically continued toward her objective. By her 4th evasion, she had reached the artillery position and released her bomb, destroying 2 88-meter guns and their ammunition store. This tactic, perfected over hundreds of missions toward her eventual 852, rendered the superior German aircraft impotent. The German pilot filed his report that night. Target evasion successful through deliberate speed, reduction below engagement parameter, recommend dedicated slow-speed interception tactics, development. No such tactics would ever materialize. The second advantage emerged from what Germans considered the PO2's greatest vulnerability, its primitive construction. German aircraft engineering logic seemed sound. Metal airframes offered superior protection against enemy fire compared to fabric and wood. Yet this created an unexpected materials paradox. When bullets struck a metal aircraft, they penetrated the aluminum skin, creating razor-sharp shrapnel that ricocheted inside the fuselage, severing control cable, puncturing fuel line, and killing crew members. German ammunition was specifically designed for metal targets, explosive rounds, incendiary tracers, and armor-piercing bullets that wasted much of their energy penetrating non-existent armor. Against canvas aircraft, these same bullets simply pass through the fabric, making clean holes with minimal energy transfer, creating no shrapnel and causing negligible secondary damage. Unless a bullet directly struck a wooden structural spar, engine, fuel tank, or crew member, a small percentage of the aircraft's volume, the PO2 remained airworthy. Even substantial canvas tears had minimal effect on aerodynamics. While German aircraft required hours of metal welding for repairs, damaged PO2s could be patched in 30 minutes with new canvas and dope. German pilots increasingly reported the frustration of hitting Night Witch aircraft without achieving kills, confirmed multiple hits on target aircraft with visible impact flashes, yet target maintained flight path with no apparent performance degradation. During her 724th mission on August 2, 1943, Nadezhda Popova proved this advantage definitively. Attacking a German fuel depot near Novorossiysk, her aircraft came under intense anti-aircraft fire. Upon returning to base, ground crews counted 42 bullet holes, 17 through the upper wing, 11 in the lower wing, 8 in the fuselage, and 6 through the tail surfaces. 1 round had passed through her cockpit, missing her head by centimeters and continuing through the opposite side. The maintenance officer marveled at the aircraft's condition, noting, "Any one of these hits would have downed a metal aircraft, but the PO2s simply let the bullets pass through." After applying canvas patches over the worst tears, the aircraft was declared airworthy within 40 minutes. Popova flew 3 more missions that night in the same damaged aircraft, contributing to her record of 18 sorties in a single night. When a visiting bomber pilot questioned the wisdom of flying such a bullet-riddled plane, Popova reportedly responded, "In their metal coffins, I would be lying in mine. Canvas doesn't create shrapnel. The Germans shoot through us, but we keep flying." But the third advantage proved most devastating to German morale. The cornerstone of German night defense relied on acoustic detection, sophisticated sound-ranging equipment that triangulated engine noise to direct searchlights and anti-aircraft fire. Standard German protocol followed a predictable sequence: hear approaching engine, activate searchlight batteries, commence anti-aircraft fire, and scramble night fire. The Night Witches discovered a tactic that rendered this entire defensive network useless. They would approach targets at 8,000 feet altitude with engines at full throttle, deliberately allowing German acoustic detection to pick up their approach. German crews would activate searchlights and prepare anti-aircraft position. But at approximately 3,000 feet from the target, Night Witch pilots would completely shut down their engine. The PO2's excellent glide ratio of approximately 110 meant losing only 1 foot of altitude for every 10 feet of forward travel. From 3,000 feet, this provided nearly 30,000 feet, 5.6 miles, of silent gliding approach at roughly 60 meters per For 5 to 6 minutes, the only sound produced was the soft rustling of wind through canvas wing, inaudible from the ground. The psychological impact on German troops was profound. Hearing approaching aircraft, preparing defenses, then experiencing eerie silence followed by unexpected explosions. By the time bombs detonated, the PO2s would be gliding away, restarting engines only after clearing the target area. On the night of June 8, 1943, during her record-setting run of 18 missions, Nadezhda Popova used this silent approach 11 consecutive times. On her seventh sortie that night, her target was a German command post near Kuban, where a divisional planning session was underway. Following established protocol, she approached at 7,500 feet, with the engine growling loudly enough to trigger German defenses. Searchlight beams immediately began sweeping the sky as anti-aircraft batteries prepared to fire. At precisely 2,800 feet from target, she cut the engine. The Po-2 transitioned to a ghost-like silent glide directly over the German position. Through the clear night air, she could hear German soldiers calling to each other below. "Where are the aircraft? I don't hear anything now." Searchlights swept frantically across empty sky as confused operators tried to locate the suddenly silent threat. Popova glided precisely over the command building and released her bomb. The explosions illuminated the upturned faces of German soldiers still searching the sky for aircraft they couldn't see or hear. Only after clearing the target area by 2 kilometers did she restart her engine. She would repeat this silent approach technique on 643 of her eventual 852 mission. As she later told her squadron mates, "We were ghosts. They couldn't fight. They feared the silence more than the bombs, because silence meant death was already above them." German technical superiority on paper meant nothing in operational reality. The impressive specifications of the Junkers Ju-88, 300 mph top speed, 2,400 horsepower engines, onboard radar, radio, armor plating, and a crew of 4 represented the pinnacle of German engineering. Each aircraft cost approximately $80,000, $200,000 Reichsmarks, required 3 months to build using skilled labor and precision manufacturing, and demanded meticulous maintenance between missions. This technological advantage translated into severely limited operational tempo. Ju-88 night fighter crews typically flew a maximum of 1 to 2 sorties per night. Each mission required 3 to 4 hours of maintenance checks, refueling, rearming, and crew rest before the aircraft could deploy again. The mental fatigue of 4 men coordinating complex tasks in a high-stress environment further limited operational capacity. The average Ju-88 night fighter completed 40-60 missions before loss or crew rotation, with approximately 60% survival rate. Many lost not to combat, but to weather, navigation errors, and mechanical failures. The PO2 reality inverted every assumption about combat aircraft effectiveness. Its primitive specifications, 94 meter speed, 100 horsepower engine, no radar, no radios, no armor, crew of 2, suggested combat ineffective. Yet these same limitations enabled extraordinary operational tempo. Each aircraft cost roughly $5,000, required only 3 weeks to build, using minimal skilled labor, and needed almost no maintenance between missions. A complete turnaround, refueling, reloading bomb, basic safety took just 7 minutes. The simplified aircraft systems and crew coordination between 2 women who had flown hundreds of missions together eliminated complexity-related failure. The average night witch completed between 800 and 1,000 missions, with a remarkable 96.8% survival rate. The most sophisticated, expensive aircraft in the Luftwaffe inventory yielded lower operational effectiveness than the simplest, cheapest aircraft in the Soviet arsenal. These statistics were embodied in Nadezhda Popova's operational record during her legendary night of 18 consecutive missions on June 9th, 1943. She took off for her first sortie at 22:15 hours and completed her final mission at 0542 hours, just before dawn, averaging 25 minutes per complete cycle. This included flying to the target, dropping bomb, returning to base, debriefing, refueling, reloading, and launching again. The ground crew efficiencies became so streamlined that mechanics could prepare her aircraft faster than she could walk from the debriefing tent to the cockpit. During these 18 missions, she dropped approximately 2 5 tons of bombs on multiple German positions, 2 ammunition dumps, 3 barracks complexes, a vehicle park, a fuel depot, and a command post. German casualties from her sorties that night were estimated at 37 killed and dozens wounded. The most accomplished Luftwaffe night fighter pilot, by comparison, had never exceeded 4 sorties in a single night. By this point in the war, her advancement toward 852 missions was becoming legendary, even among German soldiers who had begun referring to her aircraft by the distinctive pattern of patches covering previous bullet holes. Wehrmacht logistics officers were recording a disturbing pattern in resource allocation. German expenditure attempting to stop Night Witch raids had reached staggering proportion. Over 2 million anti-aircraft rounds had been fired specifically at these aircraft. At an average cost of 50 Reichsmarks per anti-aircraft shell, this represented 100 million Reichsmarks, approximately $40 million USD, in ammunition alone. More than 1,000 dedicated fighter intercept attempts had been launched at a cost of 500 Reichsmarks operational expense per sortie. Over 200 searchlight batteries had been deployed specifically for night defense against these raids, each requiring specialized generators, maintenance, and crews. The personnel commitment was equally significant. More than 5,000 German soldiers had been assigned to counter night harassment raids, diverting them from frontline duties. The total German investment in countering Night Witch operations exceeded 125 million Reichsmarks. By contrast, the Soviet investment in the entire 588th Regiment was minimal. 40 PO-2 aircraft at $5,000 each totaled just $200,000. The bombs and ammunition they dropped cost a fraction of the defensive ammunition expended against them. Personnel requirements were equally economical. 80 pilots and navigators with minimal ground crew support totaled fewer than 150 personnel. The entire Night Witch operation cost the Soviet military under $2 million USD. This created an extraordinary cost ratio. Germans were spending at least 25 Reichsmarks for every 1 ruble the Soviets invested. Despite this massive expenditure, Germans achieved 0 confirmed fighter kills against Night Witches. The regiment represented perfect asymmetric warfare, minimal Soviet investment producing maximum enemy resource drain, while maintaining operational effectiveness. Nadezhda Popova personally represented this asymmetric efficiency on an individual level. If German defenses fired an average of 1,000 rounds attempting to hit her aircraft per mission, her 852 missions had drawn approximately 852,000 anti-aircraft rounds at a cost of 42.6 million Reichsmarks. The fuel, maintenance, and operational expenses of fighter aircraft scrambled specifically to intercept her added millions more to the total. Yet she survived, continuing to inflict damage throughout the war. Her bombs destroyed an estimated 75 tons of ammunition, 150 vehicles, and damaged or destroyed dozens of infrastructure targets, including bridges, railway junctions, and command posts. The value of German material destroyed through her missions alone was estimated at 30+ million Reichsmarks. For comparison, the average United States Army Air Force bomber crew rotated home after completing 25 missions. Nadezhda Popova had completed the equivalent of 34 full American tours of duty, representing more combat sorties than entire squadrons of German night fighters combined. Her 852 missions, and particularly the night she flew 18 consecutive sorties, made her one of the most cost-effective weapons in the Soviet arsenal. German high command was beginning to realize that killing women in wooden biplanes was costing more than those women were costing the Soviets. And Nadezhda Popova had no intention of stopping. As German high command grappled with the resource drain, frontline intelligence was about to deliver a shocking revelation. On November 14, 1942, near Mozdok, a PO-2 sustained engine damage from ground fire and was forced down behind German line. Oberfeldwebel Klaus Schumann's infantry patrol reached the crash site before the crew could escape. Approaching the aircraft with weapons ready, they expected to capture male Soviet airmen. Instead, they found 2 young women attempting to destroy navigation documents. Initial confusion among my men was evident, Schumann later reported. Prisoners wore standard flight suits, but removal of helmets revealed unmistakably female features. Both spoke Russian and refused to provide information beyond name, rank, and serial number. The women were identified as Lieutenant Marina Roskova and Navigator Irina Sabrova from the 508th Night Bomber Regiment. A thorough search of the aircraft yielded a logbook documenting 274 completed missions, personal photographs, and official orders signed by female commanding officers using feminine form military title. Schumann's initial assumption that these were isolated female personnel was dispelled by the evidence suggesting an entirely female unit. The prisoners were transferred to division headquarters for interrogation. Lieutenant Dieter Hoffmann, intelligence officer with previous experience interrogating Soviet airmen, noted, prisoners maintained composure throughout question. Younger subject, age approximately 20, displayed particular defiance. Both confirmed all flight personnel in their regiment were female. Initially considered this Soviet disinformation, but documentation found an aircraft supports their claim. Most concerning, mission log indicates repeated successful attacks against high-value targets previously attributed to conventional bomber units. The report reached the desk of Oberst Wilhelm Kemner, who initially dismissed it as clerical error or propaganda. However, within the same week, similar reports arrived from 3 different sectors. A reconnaissance unit recovered a crashed PO-2 with a female pilot's body. An infantry company captured documents during a hasty airfield evacuation, revealing an entire roster of female names. A forward-listening post intercepted radio communications between pilots using unmistakably female voices. Each report was meticulously verified, then escalated through the chain of command. By early December 1942, the evidence had reached Wehrmacht High Command. General Erich von Manstein himself received the briefing from Intelligence Chief Oberst Hans Reinhardt. The presentation included photographs, captured documents, and preliminary interrogation transcript. Reinhardt methodically laid out the evidence. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment consisted entirely of female personnel, had been operational since June 1942, and was responsible for a significant portion of night harassment raids. Aircraft serial numbers identified in multiple raid reports matched those on the regiment's roster. Cross-referencing with Night Witch raid patterns confirmed their operational area and tactics. The conclusion became unavoidable. Women were responsible for the harassment campaign that had cost millions in resources and thousands of sleepless nights. The revelation created a crisis within Wehrmacht command structure. Initial disbelief gave way to profound discomfort. General Friedrich von Mellenthin reportedly pounded the table during one briefing, declaring, "This is impossible. Women cannot fly combat missions." Yet the evidence was irrefutable. For the proud Luftwaffe, the humiliation cut especially deep. Elite pilots who had survived the Battle of Britain were being systematically outmaneuvered by young women in obsolete training aircraft. Several Luftwaffe squadron commanders requested transfers rather than acknowledge the source of their frustration. The ideological implications threatened Nazi doctrine about women's proper role. If Soviet women could conduct effective combat operations, what did that imply about German assumption? More practically, if German intelligence had missed something this fundamental, what else had they misunderstood about Soviet capability? The propaganda implications proved equally troublesome. How could the Reich explain to its population that Aryan superiority was being challenged nightly by female pilots? The response came in the form of Operational Order 4427, dated December 18, 1942. All references to enemy night bomber personnel in official reports shall employ standard military terminology without specific reference to gender. Avoid terms female, women, or similar designation. This directive maintains operational focus and prevents unnecessary speculation affecting troop morale. All previous reports containing such references shall be reclassified and restricted to command-level access only. Despite official suppression, the nickname Nachthexen, night witches, spread rapidly among frontline troops. Some units began incorporating specific countermeasures into their defensive planning, requesting dedicated anti-night witch resources. Others refused to acknowledge gender as relevant, focusing solely on the tactical threat. Field Marshal Walter Model reportedly remarked to his staff, "I don't care if they're women, children, or trained bears. Find a way to stop them." While German command struggled with the revelation, Nadezhda Popova continued her missions without pause. On the night Germans confirmed her regiment's composition, she was completing her 583rd mission, unaware her identity had become the subject of high-level Wehrmacht briefing. By this point, she had already completed well over half of her eventual 852 mission and was refining the tactics that would enable her record night of 18 consecutive sorties. On December 21st, 1942, just 3 days after the German suppression order, Popova led a formation of 3 POWs against a German fuel depot near Rostov. The attack destroyed 17 tanker trucks and ignited a fire visible from 30 kilometers away. When later informed that Germans had discovered her regiment's composition, she reportedly shrugged. "We didn't fly to prove women could fight. We flew because fascists had invaded our homeland. Whether they knew we were women made no difference to our bomb." The discovery changed nothing operational. The night witches continued flying, and Germans continued dying. After the war, Soviet and Allied interrogators collected testimonies from German prisoners about their experiences on the Eastern Front. When questioning turned to night operations, interrogators noted an unexpected consistency in responses to mentions of the night witch. Even hardened SS officers showed visible reaction, a tightening of jaw muscle, a shift in posture, or a momentary loss of composure. A pattern emerged across hundreds of interviews that revealed the profound psychological impact these female aviators had inflicted. Oberleutnant Franz Weber, a Ju-88 night fighter pilot with NJG-4 captured near Berlin in April 1945, provided particularly detailed testimony. "We received orders to intercept these aircraft in August 1942. Command didn't tell us they were women. We only learned after capture. I attempted interception 23 times, 23 failures. The aircraft were too slow for engagement. My stall warnings would activate every time I tried to match their speed. It was humiliating. You master the Ju-88, face British Lancasters, understand air combat. Then a wooden biplane makes you look foolish. When I learned they were women, I pause in transcript, had no words. We couldn't catch them because physics wouldn't allow it. Their gender was irrelevant. They had beaten aerodynamics itself." Hauptmann Gerhard Müller, who commanded a flak battery in eastern Ukraine, testified, "My battery fired approximately 18,000 rounds at these aircraft between September 1942 and February 1944. We achieved perhaps 5 confirmed hits. They would approach with engines loud, then suddenly silence. We would fire at where we thought they were, but we were shooting at ghosts. The sound would return only after bombs exploded. The psychological effect on my men was severe. Many requested transfer. Some had nervous breakdowns. We feared the silence more than the explosion. Learning they were women added a dimension of shame, I suppose, that we, the Wehrmacht, could be tormented so effectively by Soviet female pilots." A clear pattern emerged in these testimonies. Nearly all mentioned the eerie silence preceding attacks and its psychological impact. Many described failed interception attempts due to the speed differential, often with technical precision. The revelation about gender produced consistent reactions of shock, sometimes disbelief, occasionally admiration. Many attempted to rationalize. Soviet propaganda exaggerated female involvement. Others admitted their gender made no difference. They were effective regardless. A phrase appeared in various forms across dozens of testimonies. "We couldn't catch what we couldn't match in speed." Some testimonies referenced Nadezhda Popova specifically, though often without knowing her name. Lieutenant Heinrich Bauer, who served with an infantry regiment in the Kuban sector, stated, "There was one aircraft we learned to recognize by the distinctive pattern of repair patches covering its wings and fuselage. This aircraft appeared over our positions at least twice weekly. We began calling it the Patchwork Devil because it would arrive in total silence. I witnessed this aircraft's attacks 11 times personally. On February 3, 1943, it destroyed our ammunition depot, killing 14 men. On March 17th, it hit our command post during a staff meeting, killing 2 officers, including our battalion commander. After surrender, I learned from Soviet records this was likely Lieutenant Popova. She had flown over 800 missions. We never came close to shooting her down. She was untouchable." Popova remained aware that Germans were capturing her comrade. 2 pilots from her squadron had been taken prisoner in early 1943. Yet she maintained her extraordinary operational tempo, completing her record-setting night of 18 consecutive missions in June 1943. By war's end, Her 852 missions, including her legendary night of 18 sorties, became documented not just in Soviet records, but in German testimonies from interrogation centers across occupied Europe. When asked after the war about German POW accounts that specifically mentioned her aircraft, she remarked, "We did what needed doing. Whether they respected us or feared us or were humiliated by us was their concern. Our concern was victory." The testimonies confirmed what Germans had discovered too late. The night witches weren't anomalies or propaganda. They were among the most effective tactical weapons deployed on the Eastern Front, and Nadezhda Popova was among the deadliest of them all. When the war in Europe ended on May 9, 1945, Nadezhda Popova's final record stood as testament to what Germans had dismissed as impossible. Her 852 combat missions represented an achievement unparalleled in aerial warfare. Over 3 years of continuous operations from June 1942 through May 1945, she accumulated approximately 1,300 flight hours in combat condition. Her aircraft delivered an estimated 90 tons of bombs onto German position, with each 100-kilogram payload hand-released for maximum precision. The sheer volume of missions meant that Popova averaged 28 sorties per month throughout the war, a pace that elite bomber units considered unsustainable. Most remarkably, she survived the entire conflict without being shot down, despite her aircraft suffering bullet damage on 42 separate documented occasions. Her record night of 18 consecutive missions in a single 8-hour period remained unmatched by any pilot on either side of the conflict. For her extraordinary service, she received the Soviet Union's highest honor, Hero of the Soviet Union, along with 3 Orders of the Red Banner, the Order of the Patriotic War First Class, and numerous campaign medals. These statistics become more remarkable when considering the physical toll. Popova endured permanent frostbite scars on her face and hands from hundreds of hours in an open cockpit at -40 degrees. Her hearing suffered damage from the constant engine noise. Each mission carried approximately a 2% chance of death, meaning she faced mortality hundreds of times, knowing the statistical improbability of survival. Yet while the 588th Regiment lost 32 of its approximately 80 personnel, Popova continued night after night, mission after mission, ultimately achieving a number that German intelligence officers initially refused to believe possible. To understand the magnitude of these numbers, context matters. The most accomplished German night fighter pilots completed 40 to 60 missions before rotation or loss. The United States Army Air Force considered 25 missions a complete tour of duty, after which bomber crews were sent home. Popova completed the equivalent of 34 full American tours. Even among the elite Soviet male bomber pilots, career totals typically ranged from 150 to 300 missions. Among her fellow night witches, the regiment average stood at approximately 600 missions. Popova exceeded this by 42%. Her 852 missions represented more sorties than entire bomber squadrons combined. If each mission averaged 1.5 hours of flight time, she spent over 1,300 hours, 54 full days, in combat conditions. German records captured after the war estimated that Popova's raids alone destroyed or damaged 17 ammunition dumps, 2 railway stations, 42 supply vehicles, and killed at least 400 German personnel. The material value of these losses exceeded 11 million Reichsmarks, all accomplished by a single pilot in an aircraft that cost approximately $5,000 to produce. By any metric, Nadezhda Popova's operational record represented one of the most sustained combat performances in aviation history, and she achieved it in an aircraft Germans considered too primitive to matter. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment's collective record validated Soviet High Command's controversial decision to deploy women in combat roles. Together, the regiment flew more than 23,000 combat sorties, dropping over 3,000 tons of bombs on German positions. Intelligence estimates after the war suggested they had inflicted approximately 5,000 German casualties and destroyed hundreds of ammunition dumps, thousands of vehicles, and countless field installations. Throughout their operational period from May 1942 through May 1945, they maintained continuous night harassment without interruption. Most remarkably, the regiment suffered 32 pilots and navigators killed from approximately 80 personnel. a 98% mission survival rate that far exceeded conventional Soviet bomber units, which typically experienced 40 to 60% losses. This differential proved the effectiveness of their unconventional tactics and aircraft. The economic calculus was equally extraordinary. The entire regiment, aircraft, maintenance, personnel, and munition cost the Soviet military approximately $2 million to field and maintain throughout the war. The damage they inflicted on German infrastructure, equipment, and personnel was valued at more than $50 million. Meanwhile, German expenditure countering their operation, anti-aircraft ammunition, fighter sorties, searchlight batteries, and dedicated personnel exceeded 125 million Reichsmarks. This created a staggering cost ratio. For every ruble the Soviets invested in the Nightwitch, Germans spent 60 Reichsmarks attempting to counter them. Despite this massive German investment, not a single confirmed aerial kill of a Nightwitch aircraft by German fighters was ever recorded. Almost all regiment losses came from ground fire, not air combat, a testament to the stall speed paradox that rendered conventional fighters ineffective against them. But numbers alone don't capture the strategic value the regiment provided. The psychological impact on German troops proved immeasurable. Thousands of soldiers suffered sleep deprivation, diminished morale, and constant anxiety from the unpredictable night raid. More than 5,000 German personnel were tied down in defensive positions, specifically to counter Nightwitch operations, preventing their deployment to combat roles. Supply lines required rerouting, creating longer and more vulnerable transport routes that further stretched German logistics. The propaganda value extended beyond military consideration. The Night Witches provided tangible proof that Soviet women could fight effectively, boosting civilian morale and encouraging broader female participation in the war effort. Perhaps most significantly, they exposed fundamental flaws in German intelligence assessment and doctrinal assumptions about both gender capabilities and technological requirements for effective warfare. Marshal Georgy Zhukov reportedly noted in his memoirs, "The Night Witches achieved strategic impact disproportionate to their numbers. They cost us almost nothing and cost the Germans everything they spent trying to stop them." The 588th Regiment proved that in warfare, technological superiority matters less than tactical innovation, and determination can overcome engineering. Nadezhda Popova's 852 mission embodied this principle. After the war ended, Nadezhda Popova faced a different kind of challenge, returning to civilian life after 3 years of nightly combat. Initially celebrated with Soviet honors and victory parades, she gradually adapted to peace. She continued in aviation, becoming a flight instructor and eventually a flight academy director, training hundreds of civilian pilots. She married fellow pilot Semyon Kharlamov, himself a decorated hero of the Soviet Union, and they had one son. Unlike many veterans, Popova frequently spoke about her wartime experience, particularly in later years. She maintained close relationships with surviving squadron mates, attending annual reunions until her death. She advocated for greater recognition of women's military contribution and supported veterans' causes throughout her life. Though awarded the highest Soviet decoration, Hero of the Soviet Union, 3 Orders of the Red Banner, the Order of the Patriotic War First Class, Popova often noted that medals mattered less than the memory of those who didn't return. Soviet recognition of the Night Witches fluctuated with political wins. Initially celebrated in immediate post-war propaganda, their achievements were somewhat diminished during Stalin's later years as he focused attention on his own leadership. Khrushchev's era brought renewed recognition, with official military histories documenting their achievements. Monuments honoring the regiment were established in Moscow, Krasnodar, and other cities across the Soviet Union. Popova lived until 2013, passing away at age 91 in Moscow. In her hometown of Donetsk, Ukraine, a monument and museum exhibit commemorate her achievement, while Russian military academies study her tactics as models of asymmetric warfare. For decades, the Night Witches remained virtually unknown in the West. During the Cold War, Western military historians often dismissed accounts of their achievements as Soviet propaganda, exaggerating female combat roles for ideological purposes. The opening of Soviet archives following the collapse of the USSR in 1991 changed this perception dramatically. Historians gained access to detailed mission records, after-action reports, and German intelligence assessments that validated Soviet claims about the regiment's effectiveness. By the early 2000s, several scholarly books and documentaries brought their story to Western audiences. The publication of German POW testimonies provided further validation, confirming that this wasn't propaganda, but documented history with substantial impact on German operations. Museums across Europe, including the Imperial War Museum in London and the Russian Air Force Museum near Moscow, now feature exhibits on the Night Witches. Streets bearing Popova's name can be found in several Russian and Ukrainian cities, and her image has appeared on commemorative postal stamps in both nations. The story of Nadezhda Popova and the Night Witches transcends its historical moment, offering lessons that remain relevant across time and culture. Their experience demonstrates that asymmetric tactics can defeat technological superiority when applied with discipline and innovation. The psychological impact of their operation, particularly the silent tactic that created terror among German troops, often exceeded the physical damage inflicted by their bomb, proving that warfare exists in the mind as much as on the battlefield. Their success exposed the danger of underestimating any enemy based on preconception rather than capability. German assumptions about gender and aircraft primitiveness created fatal blind spots in their defensive planning. As military theorists have subsequently noted, prejudice creates vulnerability, and dismissing threats based on superficial assessments invites defeat. Popova's 852 missions required extraordinary personal resilience. Each sortie carried mortal risk, yet she continued night after night for 3 years. The physical toll, frostbite, exhaustion, hearing damage, and psychological burden of watching squadron mates die would have broken lesser spirits. Her survival required not just skill and luck, but a refusal to surrender to circumstance. Perhaps most significantly, the Night Witches demonstrated fundamental principles about physics and engineering that challenge conventional military thinking. Their success proved that sometimes simple design beats complexity, that understanding one's operational environment, like the stall-speed paradox, matters more than raw power, and that constraints often force innovations like the silent gliding tactic that wouldn't emerge in resource-rich environments. The right tool for the job isn't always the most advanced. Sometimes it's the most appropriate. On February 23, 1945, when Nadezhda Popova climbed into her POW-2 for mission number 852, she represented everything the Germans had dismissed 3 years earlier. The Oberst, who had laughed at schoolgirls in crop dusters, could never have imagined the cost of his miscalculation. Through the stall-speed paradox that rendered German fighters impotent, the canvas construction that survived bullet hit that would have downed metal aircraft, and the silent approach that terrified German troops, Popova and her sister had rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. Her 852 missions weren't just sorties. They were proof that determination makes physics itself irrelevant. In wooden biplanes that shouldn't have worked against an enemy that refused to take them seriously, the Night Witches demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the most powerful. It's the one the enemy never sees coming until it's too late.